Many of you may have been following my recent post on the scandal going on in China with this huge property company, Evergrande. And you might have been wondering what was going to happen at the end of last week because they missed out on paying crucial interest on some of their loans and their borrowings. These amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet somehow they've managed to survive that. I believe they've come to some sort of arrangements with creditors. And now we hear that the People's Bank of China has made an announcement on the Evergrande crisis. The government obviously claimed that, fears, I guess, that if Evergrande go down and would be allowed to fail, the risk, it could risk the whole of the Chinese economy and possibly, the wider economic growth of the whole country and the world, in fact. So on Monday, without actually mentioning the name of Evergrande, the Chinese central bank promised to, and I'll read this out, protect consumers exposed to the housing market. Now these are the hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million consumers that have bought properties from this company, and maybe have no way of knowing whether they're going to see their property or certainly see the money that they've paid out already for the properties. So the announcement it's actually by the People's Bank of China, is seen as a sign that authorities are ready to take steps to prevent the potential catastrophe of Evergrande's crisis spread into other parts of the economy. Evergrande's debts, as you probably know by now, over $300 billion. They've grown into one of the biggest property companies in the world, and most of it is fueled by debt. And these are national and international creditors, including bondholders, thousands of bondholders, people that basically a bond is somebody lending them money in the form of a bond rather than a loan or equity. And there's 171 domestic banks and 121 other financial firms. And then there are these millions of customers who've paid money for properties that have yet to be built. And then there are suppliers, staff who've had delays on their salaries. So if the company's allowed to fail, it could bring down the banks that have lent them this money, because how much of the money have the bank lent to them? Is it big enough for them to sort of be dragged into into bankruptcy? But it could also, and this is a wider aspect of it, cause a credit crunch squeeze on lending, similar to the 2008 global financial crisis. Remember, they called it the credit crunch, which sounds a bit like a breakfast cereal, doesn't it? Credit crunch. Get your credit crunch this morning. Well, in 2008, when Lehman Brothers went down, they were indebted, and Bear Stearns went down, then suddenly all the banks and lenders had a liquidity problem. They pulled in the reins, so there was no money around. You couldn't get, and it trickled all the way down to the market where you couldn't get mortgages. Suddenly lenders who had, say, 2,000 mortgage products, withdrew all the products apart from one or two. And it was very difficult to get mortgages in 2008, 2009. And that took a long time to work itself out. And then the government started this QE, printing money, quantitative easing, and that's still going on today. America's recently printed something like $6 trillion to keep things going. They're pumping over something like $100 billion every month into the economy to keep things propped up. And this kind of goes back to the 2008 crisis, which I don't think, because the banks were not allowed to fail and wipe out the debts, then, the government has artificially kept things going. And then since then, because of all this money printing, the price of assets have gone up, property's gone up, shares have gone up, bonds have gone up in price. So it's asset prices that have gone up. So people who owned assets have done very well. But other people who didn't own those assets have done worse, because their pay in real terms over the last 10, 15 years has remained static or even gone down. So a lot of people are worse off, but then there are others who are become multimillionaires from it, even billionaires over this period. So what it is when I say a company, if it's allowed to fail, I think the Chinese government fear that if this company failed, it could bring down everybody else and bring down the economy. Because when you owe the bank, a few 100,000 or 1 million, maybe you lose sleep at night. When you owe the bank billions, maybe they're the ones losing sleep at night, as it was with Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch was too big to fail during a previous financial crisis. And he was one of these Australian corporate raiders like Rupert Holmes à Court. But they left him alone, but brought down others like Rupert, because the banks could move in on him, get most of their money back, and walk away. But Rupert was a different situation. He's launched the Sky satellite and bet the company on it. So he was in debt so much that they couldn't bring him down. And of course, he was left to recover and trade his way out of the problem. And now, of course, he's worth billions himself. But that can happen. Evergrande may be able to trade their way out of it with a bit of government intervention. But if it did go down, I think it could cause another global financial crisis. Now, why does this matter anyway to someone that, China's economy matters to the rest of the world. It drives demand and spending, and it also manufactures a lot of our products. But for instance, just a slowdown, or if construction just stopped for a while, then this would hit one country like Australia, for instance. Most of their iron ore is exported to China. That represents a huge part of the country's currently locked down economy. And this week, Goldman Sachs became the latest bank to downgrade China's growth from 8.2% this year to 7.8%. It doesn't sound much, 0.5%, but then that's 0.5% of billions, isn't it? So it is a lot of money, and 8.2 to 7.8, 0.5%. Who cares? But it's a big deal when you're talking about economic growth and the size of the economy. Now, of course, China's still growing, 7.8%. Compared to say most Western countries might be 2%. So that's pretty good growth. So in the long term, they should be okay. But the last thing they need is some big property crisis or scandal to hit the economy now. And we know also that Chinese buyers have been scooping up properties all over the world, haven't they? London, Manila, Sydney, Auckland, Toronto, where prices, frankly, have hit all-time highs. The market, there's a massive bubble in there. There's a massive bubble in Australian property, Sydney, Perth. There's a massive bubble in New Zealand, in Auckland, and Vancouver, Toronto. London, I think there's a bit of a bubble there, but I think some of the most expensive properties now are in these countries I've just mentioned, and also in places like Shanghai and Beijing. The property market's gone crazy there. It reminds me of the previous bubbles that we've had here, where everyone's just buying properties, and the government wants to try and rein this in, because a lot of it's been funded by huge amounts of debt. So they've tried to rein this in recently, and I think that's one of the things that's forced companies like Evergrande to tighten their belts, and Evergrande are the biggest ones of them all. But it just reminds me of that scramble to buy properties. The government has also said I think they want to stop this buy-to-let boom that's going on over there. Have you heard of that one before? Because they feel that is creating a bubble. So the government are obviously realising that something's not right here, and they need to start doing something about it. But this action of reining in the debt and reining in how much companies can hold in debt has caused this squeeze on Evergrande. Now, Evergrande is a huge conglomerate. It doesn't just build houses and flats. It builds, it's building stadiums. It's got a car company. It's a conglomerate of companies. And I often feel that when companies spread themselves too thin, that's when things can start going wrong. They've also bought this trophy football club, haven't they? Shenzhen, I think, and. That's when you think, like, you start seeing the director, the chairman sitting in the box, surrounded by celebrities, and this is where things can sometimes backfire. But as I said, much of China's economic growth has been funded by this property boom and lending and debt and that sort of thing. And it looks like it's now sort of coming home to roost. So many people have invested, of course, their life savings in buying properties from Evergrande. And now they fear that they may never see this again. Or the apartments, they're normally apartments that they bought off-plan. Off-plan means you're buying it off the plans. You're going into a showroom on site, and they show you nice pretty pictures. This is what it's going to look like. These are the plans. And then you might pick on the plan, well, I like number 1856, and that's on the corner there looking that way. So all you can see is the plan, really, and then sort of mock-up presentations of what the site will look like, right? But buying these types of properties can be risky. Many people buy them without ever intending to complete on them. They buy them as an off-plan investment, hoping that when the properties are built in 2, 3, 4 years' time, that they'll be able to sell that property on and make a profit without even really fully completing on it and fully owning it. Sometimes this might be done with a 10% deposit up front. So it's easy, you're buying a property, £100,000, and they say, well, just put down 10% here, and then you can pay the rest by instalments. And then the company use those deposits to build a property. And so they're really using your money to build the property that you are buying from them. And then you'll get bigger discounts usually if you put down more. Obviously, you'll get the biggest discount if you pay in full. And there are lots of properties in the Philippines being sold like this at the moment. Companies go out around the world talking to expat nurses and people working abroad, OFWs they're called, and they say, wouldn't you like to own this nice new condo right in the city centre? It overlooks the river, it overlooks the city, and it sounds great because you only usually have to put down a small deposit, sometimes hardly any deposit, and then you're paying the rest by instalments. And sometimes they say, well, we'll fix the instalments at just a few £100 or dollars a month. And so, well, that's easy, I can do that. And then comes the stage payments later on. They say, oh, don't worry about that. You can borrow the money when the time comes. Some of these people, when the time comes, haven't got the money. They can't get mortgages. They can't get the borrowings, or the mortgages are 11-12% per annum, which is huge. And they end up defaulting on the properties, perhaps lose their deposits, and then they're sold on to somebody else at a discount to keep things going. But the basic principle is to buy off plan. They sell them off plan to get the money in, and by the time they're building them, most of them are pre-sold, maybe all of them. So that's the idea, but it can be risky. You might think at the time, but obviously they're going to tell you, look, this is the price today, but by the time it completes, they'll be going up to this. And you might think you're getting below market value, but you're taking the developer's word for that. And sometimes the developer is making up the price, and it's usually a high-rise apartment, and you're taking that advice from them that it will be worth more by the time you complete. Now that's fine in a rising market, but if the market turns the other way, you could come unstuck. And this has happened before in the UK on a number of occasions. I've seen whole blocks of flats where the developer's gone bust, and someone else has taken over them, and they're trying to then sell them on to other people and at much reduced prices. The Docklands was like this. If you think of the London's Docklands now, it's fabulous. They've got huge buildings, but at one time it was all going wrong. The people that built the original tower in Docklands, what's the name of that tower? The main tower in Docklands that became the headquarters of HSBC. The people who built that were a Canadian brother, a couple of Canadian brothers. They were again in so much trouble that they were too big to bring down. They got out of it, and at one time the Docklands was like, it looked disastrous because the financial crisis had come. One lender I remember saying to me when I was in the business, they said, we won't lend in Docklands. It's not suitable security. At that time you could buy a house for £40,000 or £50,000. You could buy nice luxury apartments for £50,000 and £60,000. They were so cheap. But again, during that recession period, it was difficult to borrow money. It was difficult to get hold of money. This is before the 2008 crisis. This is back in the 90s. So I've seen a few of these crises, believe me. And, people had bought these for speculation and then couldn't sell them. They didn't want to complete on them because they were worth less than they were going to pay for them. Now, those developments eventually got sorted out. And now if you go down to the Docklands and Surrey Keys and Isle of Dogs, it's fabulous down there, and if people had bought them at that time and held on to them, they would have done very well. But at the time, it was a big panic. And I think the brothers were called the Reitman brothers that built the original big tower in Docklands and started off. And now it's become a major financial centre. Thousands of people work there. They've got new underground lines, tube lines, Jubilee lines, Docklands Light Railways going into there. They've got an airport there. It's all great now. But at the time, it was looking like a disaster case. And this is happening in parts of China. There are ghost towns where the people have just left the properties. They're just, some of them have even been demolished according to videos and unsubstantiated reports. I don't know how true that is, but these things can happen, and it's all about market confidence, isn't it? If there's confidence in the market, if the government say, don't worry, everything's going to be okay, the market will continue and the confidence will continue. But when that 90s crash came, it took 5-6 years before confidence came back. There were documentaries on the BBC saying it would take 25, 20 years before the market would recover. I remember an estate agent telling me, oh, the market's not going to recover for 20 years. I said, you don't believe what they say on the BBC, do you? I said, well, but of course it didn't take that long, but it did take a long time. One property I bought, which was a new build again, it took 6 years before I could sell it for what I paid for it. Now, this is where you come into the prices, because the developers, they make up the price. So similarly, I remember a few years ago in one area, I owned a couple of flats, and flats were, I think I bought these flats for 100,000, 130,000, something like that, 2-bed flats. And then they started building new builds on an old industrial site, on a brownfield site, and they were coming out at 200, 250, sometimes 300,000. And I thought, hang on a second, they just moved the market up. And of course, the rest of them moved up as well. So they were almost dictating the market. Now, some of the people who bought those they weren't able to then sell them on for what they paid for them, because they were overpaying for them. They were paying a premium because it was a new development. Now, how they get mortgages on them, I don't know. They talk to lenders and they have deals with lenders. So the lender will say, yeah, that's valued at 200. We'll give you 90% or whatever. And this again was before the 2008 crisis, so it was very easy. But what I'm saying is the principle is that the developer makes up the price. And in some cases, the developer will say, this is the price today, it's 400,000, but next month it's going up to 410,000. Well, hold on, that's not the market putting the price up, that's just them. They're just enticing people by giving them a scarcity reason to go ahead now. Because if you don't buy it now, next month you'll be paying 410, and then in 6 months' time it's going to be 450. Well, they're just making it up as they go along. So when you come to the real market, the reality, if that property got repossessed and had to be sold quickly, it would probably only sell for like 350, not 450. Or if you just wanted to sell it on, a lot of people buying new properties are unable to sell the properties on unless they've got a really good deal, or it's a special part of town and the market's going up. Then yeah, people have made money by flipping properties that they bought off plan, but it's a risky prospect, and also it's risky because if you're doing it as a buy to let, for instance, at the time you complete, there are several hundred other people completing at the same time. So all these properties come on the market. And then what happens? Where's all the tenants going to come from? Exactly. There aren't enough tenants to fill each of those apartments, because maybe 500 have just been completed on. So you've got to be careful. If you're buying to live in, fine. That property will be yours for life. It doesn't matter if it's going up or down a little bit. Eventually it will go up. But just be careful on these new builds. You are paying a lot. And if you're buying off plan, also you're relying on the builder's integrity, you're relying on their ability to finish the project, as well as the quality of build and the ongoing management. Now, many people I know have bought new builds have found that the build quality has not been what they expected. So you've got to find a reputable builder. Now, of course, Evergrande are a reputable builder. Nobody doubted their integrity. We're the biggest in the world, that sort of thing. So you've got to be careful. If you're buying off plan from a builder that hasn't got that reputation, or a very small company, then just be careful there, because things could easily go wrong if they get into debt and fail to finish the project. And believe me, there's been lots of unfinished new build projects all over the world if they don't finish them. I was in Bulgaria a few years ago and I saw loads of building sites, unfinished building sites, and people had gone abroad to buy these from England. And they weren't even built. They weren't built properly. Didn't have proper roof and insulation. There's a nightmare of problems with buying these properties, and it's especially risky if you're buying these properties in another country. Why? Because you don't understand the local laws and taxes. I mean, if you're buying something in Bulgaria or Spain, you probably can't even read the local laws. And there's been some good properties in Spain. There's been some horror stories in Spain where people have bought properties that shouldn't have been built on that land, and the local government have waited till they were built, and then they say, no, you no right to build here. Hang on a second, I've just paid to have these properties built. And then they come in eventually with bulldozers. Now, I think that there's no way that the local authority didn't know that these things were going up, but there's been some money changing hands, I guess there. It goes without saying, but and then the original developers off back to wherever they live, and not in Spain usually. So you've got to be very, very careful. In Spain, for instance, has it got planning permission to build this villa or this apartment on that land? You might think, oh, it's a lovely mountain view. But, these things can go wrong, believe me. And the big problem with a lot of people is that they don't even use a lawyer when they buy abroad. Now, they would never even think about that in the UK. When you buy a house, the first thing, who's your solicitor? Oh, it's John Smith. Right. Then, and the solicitor goes through everything. They check the title, they check the local plan to see if there's not going to be a motorway being built in your backyard. They check all of the details. But people go abroad, they get a bit of sun and sangria, and and people would say, would you like to come to this property presentation? Yeah, why not? And they buy all sorts of things. They buy timeshares for £50,000. A timeshare is like you can stay there for 2 weeks a year. Great. What is the timeshare? You own nothing. It's a rubbish piece of paper. You don't even own a lease on it. But they buy these things without taking legal advice because they go to a nice presentation, they're given a nice lunch. They just get caught up in the sun, sand, and sangria, and everything goes out the window. All their common sense goes out the window, and they do similar things. They buy properties in other countries without taking any legal advice, without using a local lawyer. They would never do that at home, would they? So that's just a few tips about buying properties off plan, but also if you're buying stuff abroad, then it's sometimes especially risky. And I know of companies that have sold properties in another country from London, but people haven't even visited the site. They've got no idea what it even looks like. So I have to tell you, I did this myself once. I bought a small apartment in another country. I won't say what country it's in, but I say I bought it, but I put a deposit down, and I think the places were only £25,000-30,000, and I think I'd given a £5,000 deposit from a guy. I knew the guy. It wasn't just I met him from nowhere. I knew the guy, and he was a reputable builder. He did get the place built, but when I went to see the finished project, I thought, hang on a second. He told me it was in a nice part of town, but actually it was in a grotty part of town. It was on the edge of a nice part of town, but they had the city there, and then there was this sort of criminal red light district on one side, and next to the building there was a big hole in the ground. I thought, what's going on there? And eventually the place got built, but other people I talked to later on said there were a lot of build quality problems with it. And the other thing is the ongoing management. What's the ongoing management of a project? I've seen some properties here that are built by quite large builders where they didn't manage them very well. So, people who thought they had parking spaces, there was no control over the parking areas. The repairs weren't done properly. The grass wasn't cut. So quickly those properties can go downhill and they look bad. I've seen similar stories in Spain as well. By the way, on that place, when I got there, I just backed out of the deal. And so I lost my deposit, but I thought it's better to sort of cut my losses than buy something that ends up being a total disaster. So really the key here is education, knowledge, local knowledge as well. But knowledge and education are key things. And something that you're not taught in school. You're not taught in school about mortgages. You're not even taught in colleges and universities about mortgage unless you're doing a specific course about that. So if you're interested in getting into property, even for yourself to live in, or you're interested in investing in property, earning a bit of cash from property without even using your own money, there is a free event this weekend which you can join. I'll put a link up to there. It's a live online networking event, and they'll teach you about mastering your property skills, networking with some other people. You can actually go to the event yourself if you want to, but it's there as a webinar. So have a look at that. Definitely don't get into property unless you've got some education, you've done some courses, and always use a good lawyer as well. A lawyer's part of your power team, if you like, to use somebody that can help you through the legal minefields. One more thing I'd like to end on is when you're getting a mortgage on a property, in some ways that gives you some protection because the lender is not going to risk their money without using a legal team, without checking everything that fits, and certainly without having surveys done to survey the property. Now, I know it's difficult with a new build property, but at least before you complete, there would be a follow-up inspection. But sometimes when people are buying things with cash, as often happens with people going abroad, a lot of people, they buy a place in the sun, as they call it, on these TV shows. Perhaps they've sold their property in the UK or wherever they live, and they're going out there with cash. And then if they're buying with cash, and even if they use a lawyer, they just give the cash out. Perhaps they're not having the proper checks done. They're not having the checks that would be done if there was a lender involved. So that's something. If you're buying in cash, just be careful, because you could be more at risk, because then you just, well, here's the cash, transfer it to your lawyers, and in some countries you're if you give them the cash, you're completing within a week or two. It's not like here, you've got all that time to do all the inquiries. I know they say that the legal system here is slow, but it does make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, as they say. So just be careful if you're buying in cash. The main thing is know what you're doing, make sure you get some education. And one way of doing that is to join this webinar this weekend, get yourself some knowledge, read some books if you have to, talk to people, but don't just go up and blurt and just buy a property just like that, or do a buy to let, even in your own country, because it can be very costly if you don't make the right decisions. Okay, so thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and just be careful out there whatever you're doing, and do join that webinar. It's absolutely free.